Welcome back, everyone. I am the Depressed Eeyore, and this is Middara on Tabletop Simulator. We did it, everyone. We finished Act 1. Uh, there's a lot to go over, but I think first I want to go ahead and give a shout out to, I believe it's pronounced Barrett, who runs the YouTube channel Meet Me at the Table. He gave me a shout out a while back. Unfortunately, I couldn't return the favor because I had everything else pre-recorded to this point. So just wanted to give a shout out to him. Definitely check out his channel. He does a lot of board game stuff. He's done some Middara stuff as well. Yeah, just wanted to throw that out there. So first things first, I want to go ahead and just go over any remaining lore stuff that we have. There was also certain cards I didn't even go over at all back when we were unlocking characters such as Echo. So with that, let's go ahead and just dive right in. So we got Echo here, Echo Ren. So this is the when you encounter her, she does you do unlock her adventure card, which can be used in crawl mode. Her special ability is Cracked. Echo is wild and has no regard for either her own safety or the safety of those around her. Echo may deal 2 irreducible damage to herself to gain 1 stamina point. It's an exhaust ability. It's really good. I like it. It can go really well with a Val build, and as long as you have some way of restoring your health through regeneration or something, there's definitely there's very little downside to this ability. It's a very good ability. And then we'll go ahead and get started. Cosmic Marionette. Echo came to Middara before the turn of the 19th century, moving from an uneventful life on Earth into an uneventful life on Middara. However, her longing for a life beyond school and politics led her to the charismatic Zephyr. Echo was swept away in a whirlwind of adventure and zeal. Zephyr was idealistic and strove for greatness. She was enraptured by him and chose to run away with Zephyr, leaving her family behind for a life of excitement and danger. Along with their mutual friend Sharon, the three formed a group of mercenaries they called the Anointed. Taking odd jobs for the elite, the Anointed eventually grew, becoming one of the most respected mercenary groups in the region. Echo quickly became a battle-hardened fighter, capable of handling herself in even the most dire situations. She became fond of dual-wielding a pair of oversized daggers and developed a combat style that was equal parts effective and showy. Through the Anointed's mercenary exploits, Echo and Zephyr eventually fell in love. Not long after, they had a son together. Nearly 18 years later, the Harbingers lost track of him and were never able to retrieve him from Earth. Echo was heartbroken, but not deterred. Before they had the chance to try again, tragedy struck. After a terrible betrayal at the hands of Charon, Echo was presumed dead. Zephyr was distraught and devoted himself to avenging her. Unbeknownst to him, Echo was still alive. Whatever happened to her over the years she was missing was still a mystery, but she was clearly not the Echo that Zephyr once knew. Her soft eyes were replaced with ceaseless madness, and her vibrancy turned to desperate violence. Whatever had transpired, it left Echo a dangerous shade of her former self. Then we got her actual boss card. Alright. All around Echo was darkness. How had she gotten here? There was betrayal, screaming, and horrifying sound of metal on bone. Still, she saw nothing. Echo frantically tried to open her eyes. Did she still have them anymore? How badly had the battle gone? Curious, she reached up and poked. Then she grunted, feeling a fresh jolt of pain. Definitely not my eyes, Echo thought. But as memory returned, she could have sworn she could feel the terrible pain of metal against her face. Hadn't she lost her eyes in the battle? Then, through the dark, something leaned in so close she could smell it. It reminded her of an old, moldy towel. Discovered your eyes? The creature asked. Its voice was old and raspy, like a kind old man. She could see its face now, or at least thought it was its face. A white marble grin gaped at her from the darkness, only inches away. Its body was long and rose out of sight, stretching away into the gloom. Or perhaps, the creature mused, its lips as still as stone, I just gave them to you. It sounded like a question, as if it was surprised as heard that she was looking at it. Where's Sharon? Echo demanded. Or she tried to. Instead, a gurgling sound escaped from a hole in her neck, oozing black fluid down her torso. She shivered and realized suddenly just how cold she was. Charon, the creature asked, though Echo was certain the name never audibly left her lips. Your friend. He's my friend now, too. With that, Echo felt herself lift from the ground, her hands suspended above her. The darkness around her lifted at last, revealing an endless landscape of unspeakable horrors. Welcome home, Echo. Then you got the Soul Stitcher. Astral Surgeon. Sharon wanted to look away from his dying friend, but he couldn't help but feel responsible for what happened to her. Echo clawed at the ground all around her, airless gas escaping her torn throat. Something had scooped her eyes out in the battle, and the beauty of her face was transformed into a gore-stained ruin. He knew many would die when he took the Council's offer. Thousands of people without names or faces. Statistics. Sharon glanced to where the worst of the slaughter had occurred, where creatures that were almost gods tore the stragglers into bloody pieces. It wasn't a fight. That would have implied it could end any other way. This was butchery. Does it hurt? Gregis asked. He too was a member of the Council of Abhorrence. Sharon was already acquainted with them. In fact, he knew all there was to know about the alien being. His enlightenment took only moments, but to Sharon it felt like decades. Gregis was once a man, much like Sharon himself. Now his form was hard to describe. His many appendages stretched out in all directions until they faded into the darkness. There were many mouths and no single source of the voice. It does. My choice killed. He froze as Echo's screams drew his attention once again. I cared for her, and Zephyr. Sharon turned towards the amorphous presence that was Gregis. I'd like to save her still. The stone face shot forward, coming to a stop a few feet away from Sharon. I could save her, Gregis said, though my Esper will need to stay beside her. Something floated nearby, a tear in Midaran space. The Soul Stitcher will allow me to reach her wherever she might go. Reach her? Sharon asked with hope in his voice. Yes, I know mortal bodies as few others can. Kill enough mortals and you become quite the surgeon. A pair of withered, spindly arms dropped from the darkness above, each one wielding a needle and thread. I'll make sure she never dies if that is your wish. It is, Sharon smiled, turning his back on Echo. His ascension would have one fewer regret. Tortured Immortal. Violent Outsiders. Tortured Immortals are twisted humanoids with multiple arms and legs. Their faces are typically hidden behind thick bandages, although they seem to be able to see just fine. They are usually seen in groups, but no one knows if they have a society or culture, as Tortured Immortals always attack on sight. Tortured Immortals are a rarity, usually only seen in truly ancient places. Some scholars think they were once human, the victims of unspeakable experiments that left them as the twisted husk they have become. Others think that they are a race of subterranean creatures, perhaps descended from one of Midara's ancient inhabitants. Regardless of their origins, tortured immortals are fierce combatants. They usually favor weapons with a long reach, as their lower torso is much larger than their upper body. A tortured immortal can cut a swath through the battlefield with their furious spinning attacks, and its legs allow incredible mobility. Numerous stories are told of adventurers being hooked by the chains and other man-catchers these creatures carry. Their victims are then pulled into the darkness of ancient tomes before being tortured and mutilated until they join the ranks of the other tortured immortals. Thankfully, there is no evidence these stories are true. No one knows if the tortured immortals have a language of their own, or if they are able to communicate. Other than their horrifying screaming, the creatures are eerily silent, and all attempts to speak with these creatures have ended in violence. The stories often justify this detail, saying that the tongues and eyes of their victims are always removed before their heads are finally wrapped in rags. The reality is that they are either fiercely territorial or just naturally aggressive. In either case, most explorers try their best to avoid them. Oops, sorry about that. My mouse is double-clicking. Epicurean Fiend. Soul Pushers are massive creatures, malevolent to their core. They have a gaping maw on their belly, with a long lashing tongue that trails thick saliva. Like the physical embodiment of gluttony, a Soul Pusher's corpulent form is covered in layers of fat and thick skin. Far from mindless brutes, Soul Butchers are cunning foes. They are able to speak, and sometimes torment their prey with description of what is to come before slaying them. Sometimes Soul Butchers will swallow their enemies whole. More often, they prefer to add them to their meat collection. Soul Butchers are gourmands that relish in preparing elaborate meals from the corpses they create. As intelligent monsters, it's not uncommon to find them heavily armored and wielding weapons fashioned from the leftovers of past victims. A Soul Butcher's den is a grotesque display of flesh and gore, with previous kills hanging from meat hooks and dripping blood onto the floor. The monster gets its name from the appearance of its home, which commonly looks like a twisted mockery of a butcher shop. In the past, soul butchers roamed the lands of Middara freely, encroaching on populated areas and making their homes on the outskirts of towns or villages. They hunt their prey at night, taking the drunk or irresponsible from the streets. Eventually, they'll be located and their lairs destroyed. In modern times, organized society has established elaborate watches to ward against such monstrosities. Alongside a growing human populace, soul butchers have become scarce. Now they lurk in ruins and wild places, killing humans only when the opportunity presents itself. Soul butchers are rare enough that most Middarans will only ever hear tales of the horrific creatures. Some explorers have encountered them, and the few scholars who seek to learn more about these horrific creatures are hard-pressed to find anyone foolish enough to search them out. Enslaved spirits. Purgatory-bound souls. Many wonder what happens after death. Fortunately, or perhaps less so depending on the circumstances, death isn't always the end. While the question of what happens when the spirit departs from the human body is still a mystery, the intangible soul is something that has been observed and measured, at least with regard to their use in magic. Many realms outside of Middara viewed them as currency, and some creatures would laugh at the idea of only having one. An enslaved spirit is just that, a soul of the deceased that is kept from its final resting place to serve the living. These souls come in as many forms as the creatures they are ripped from. When first separated from their bodies, they look much as they did in life, although pale and semi-transparent. Many attribute this mirrored form to the spirit still clinging to its original sense of identity, even in death. After a while, however, their forms tend to change as they become more accustomed to their master's whims and wishes. Those trapped in this slavery are often twisted into exaggerated symbols of death, grinning skulls, gory corpses, or anything else pleasurable to their masters. An enslaved spirit retains some of its physicality, as it helps them interact with the world to serve their master's whims. This leaves them susceptible to normal weapons, and they can be banished temporarily this way. However, they are not severed from their prisons. Nothing save permission from or the destruction of their master can permanently free them. While there have been recorded cases of individuals voluntarily becoming enslaved spirits to starve off impending death, it's not accepted by any of Middaran's human cultures. Becoming an enslaved spirit is seen as a fate worse than death, as the creatures who are capable of creating such bonds are often demand an eternity of service in exchange for their help. Obscene Rescindo. Coffin-bound soul. The obscene Rescindo sat motionless in its cavern. To an observer, it would look like an ordinary coffin, presiding over illusory treasures more abundant than any pharaoh's tomb. Each illusion was another lure to tempt denizens of the Eyrie into its lair. The Rescindo would capture a creature inside itself, then drain their energy to fuel its own enchantments. It had been doing this for so long that it sometimes forgot how it had gotten there in the first place. It was human, once, though it couldn't remember its name. It had forgotten many things since sealing its soul into the coffin. The process left a haze over its memory as the price of freedom. If it weren't for the obscene Rescindo's loyal espers, it would have had a hell of a time piecing its past together. The two pixies have explained what happened to the coffin dozens of times. Each time the tale was more embellished than the last. In the most recent edition, the pixies explained that the three of them were betrayed and trapped in the Eyrie, and those responsible had gotten away with it. The obscene Rescindo was once a handsome man and a dashing knight. While on a noble quest, they had struggled to escape the chasm, but a powerful force had sealed them down here with countless abominations. Despite the dangers of the Eyrie, the three had managed to survive for quite some time, until a new threat appeared. All the death had drawn a Shadow Lord into the Eyrie. Knowing that his soul was in danger of eternal slavery, the obscene Rescindo used his considerable powers to bind his soul into a construct in the shape of a coffin. He abandoned his body of flesh and bone for a new vessel of wood and iron. The obscene Rescindo liked this version of the story the best. The idea of revenge made it feel like someone was responsible for this torture. It also meant it could end this pain and bring closure to its existence. One day it would discover a way to escape and seize it. Whoever had trapped it here would pay for the suffering they had caused. So reading this, I feel less bad about breaking the coffin, because quite frankly, it doesn't really know what it was anymore, and it's just taking the advice of ancient pixies who just want to embellish stories and whatever. In any case, ancient pixies. Fey Guardians. Human souls were not meant to be entombed within inanimate constructs. The obscene Rescindo had existed within its coffin for so long that its memory was frayed and tattered. It could no longer remember what realm it had summoned the pixies from, or what it had promised in exchange for their service. When asked, they never gave the same answer twice. Physically, these creatures are unremarkable at first glance. They're diminutive female humanoids with wispy wings and curled horns. Upon further inspection, however, the obscene Rescindo discovered they possess some unique characteristics. While they have eyes on their faces, they are mostly useless. Their actual eyes are embedded in their horns, and grant them perfect vision even in total darkness. And while their wings are small, each one can lift 100 times their weight. This odd pair of pixies have been unwaveringly loyal to the obscene Rescindo. They have been its companions since it can remember, and they will defend the coffin with their lives. They seem obsessed with fairy tales of knights and damsels in distress, though the coffin does not know where it learned these stories. This infatuation with fables and legends has kept the obscene Rescindo entertained for longer than it can recall. Despite their fantasies, they are more than capable of taking care of themselves. Together, they harness powerful magic, corralling their foes so that they may more easily pick them off. They also use their surprising strength to carry the obscene Rescindo by its chains. They will even use the obscene Rescindo as a weapon, pulling it through their enemies like a wrecking ball. The Eyrie contains few creatures intelligent enough to indulge their fantasies, and so more often than not, the ones they discover become food. That's for the best. The obscene Rescindo can never have enough life force to fuel its enchantments. Daedalus, the Hellforged Butcher. Daedalus rose above other soul butchers. He was fierce and vicious, even as soul butchers go, and none defied him. He silenced any dissenters when he ate Grotus the Vast, after Grotus had challenged his supremacy. Needless to say, his cannibalism made a statement. Daedalus led a fearsome band of soul butchers that marauded across the lands around Greyhaven. After a successful raid, they would retreat to the Eyrie with their spoils. They were spoken of only in terrified whispers until the day that Ida and Lo Zhong sealed the Eyrie. Unwittingly trapped underground, they had to forge a new way of life. Luckily for Daedalus, there were plenty of other creatures to eat. The soul butchers would not go hungry. When the Shadow Lord made his domain among the Eyrie, Daedalus was not pleased. He confronted the Shadow Lord, who wasted no time establishing its dominance by ripping the massive tongue from Daedalus' gaping maw. Rather than simply killing him, the Shadow Lord accepted him as a servant. To hide his shame, Daedalus fashioned a huge suit of armor that hid his mouth from the other butchers. He only removes his armor in private now, and when he eats, it's in solitude. None of the other soul butchers have dared to question his reclusive behavior. For the time being, he continued to lead the soul butchers of the Eyrie, making the most of his forced imprisonment. There are many weak creatures to hunt, and his master demands little Daedalus wouldn't already be eager to do. Despite his misfortune, Daedalus is content with his new life. He still fears the Shadow Lord, but it rarely interferes with his activities, and on occasion actually provides him with prey. In exchange, the Shadow Lord added his victim souls to his ever-growing collection. And of course, we have the Shadow Lord. Sorrow-fed fiend. The Shadow Lord could sense it, an immense sadness. Death was nearby, an abundance of it, and it was delicious. The Shadow Lord knew that there would be many souls to harvest wherever it was coming from, and its current abode had begun to bore it. Fewer and fewer foolish mortal creatures had wandered into its home of late. Perhaps it was time to move on. Following the aroma of death, the Shadow Lord came to the Eyrie, a chasm on the outskirts of Alenia. The Shadow Lord was surprised to see humans inhabiting Alenia now. They built cities dotted across the landscape and were taming the wilderness with surprising vigor. The Eyrie was closed with a field of strong magic from the outside when the Shadow Lord arrived. It seemed the humans had sealed the vast depths of the chasm, holding all of its inhabitants captive. It was perfect. The barrier seemed to be alkaline in nature, and it was no large thing for the Shadow Lord to slip past it. Once inside, the Shadow Lord examined the inhabitants. They were mostly inhuman creatures, though a handful of humans were unlucky enough to be sealed with the rest. The Shadow Lord was pleased with the home it had found, with its large pool of captive souls. It could grow fat on the spoils like these. The Shadow Lord was eager to begin its harvest, but it also knew that a bit of care could yield even better results. If the culling was controlled, the population could be maintained, and sources of souls could be grown indefinitely. The Eyrie was vast, its caverns spreading for miles. With proper cultivation, creatures could thrive down here, and the natural friction caused by the limited resources would flood the caves with a sea of death entirely on its own. Above him, the newly founded city of Greyhaven would provide a backup source of souls if necessary. For now, the Shadow Lord was content with what the humans had made for him. A perfect prison for extermination and a new home. And there you go. That's all the lore. There's one card that I haven't read. Well, there's a few cards I haven't read. The conduit cards also have lore on the back, and but since I didn't go conduit form, I'm not going to read them. There's also the worm creature itself, the same creature that Cassithus was. There's a card for that, but of course we didn't encounter it, so I'm not going to read that either. Anyway, so that is all the lore, so give me one moment. Alright, so I guess the next thing I'll go ahead and dive into is all the rules I made mistakes of. This will be for the entire play session, so everything from the start of Chapter 1 to the end. So here's the list. I messed up SOI. I treated it like line of sight, so I thought it was being blocked by, opposing figures and things like that. That's not how SOI works. The only thing that blocks SOI is obstructing terrain, which means technically even elevation doesn't stop SOI. I messed up per turn abilities such as Nimble. So essentially things like Zeke's Nimble Fighter, he should be able to do that every turn. Now, a turn also I didn't really fully understand originally. I thought a turn was per card, like per AI card, but it's actually per figure. So that's something else to note. This also makes Nimble a lot stronger, because you can do it literally on every figure's turn. Now, I did treat this the same way for both the opposing figures and myself, so I was both weakening my my espers as well as the enemies. But it definitely makes a significant difference, especially against opponents such as Aisling. I messed up Femke and DM's stamina. Their max stamina is 4, and they only gain 2 as a base, which makes them a lot less effective. That was a very significant mistake, which I made through pretty much majority of the chapters. I messed up Bloody Hendrix horribly. I didn't do any of its. I pretty much messed up every aspect of it. Needless to say, I think I messed up its AI steps. I definitely messed up. Is he not in here? I could go grab him. Let's go ahead and grab his card real quick. There he is. So, first of all, I didn't understand Relentless. I didn't really figure out Relentless until very, very end of this playthrough. By the time I finished this playthrough, I had done multiple playthroughs on my own. But yeah, the way Bloody Hendrix works, or is supposed to work, is actually very, very brutal. Also, as far as his moving diagonal is concerned, it is just a straight diagonal, so you don't need to worry about shifting the spaces or anything like that, or doing stair stepping. But essentially what he does is he'll run through you, drag you with him, and ensure that you're going to be next to him at the start of the next round. So he's overall very, very nasty. It is possible, a number of these bosses can be cheesed, as in there's a very trivial way to kill them if you have the right setup and right items. Blighted Hendrix is no different, but I'm not going to go over that. But yeah, I definitely messed up those rules quite a bit. Overwatch and Quick Blow versus Flying. This I'm not entirely certain about, but I believe it was against Judas, who was flying. Now, Overwatch is the special effect of Overwatch is it lets you do a break attack equal to the range of your weapon, and it can target flying. So you can do break attacks against flying. Now, so that part's fine. You shoot the target at that point. But if you hit the target, and I don't think you can actually Quick Blow follow up with, because the Quick Blow doesn't get the benefit of targeting flying. Actually, no, it's fine. Never mind. No, that is correct. I'm good. Because all flying does is prevent break attacks. It doesn't prevent attacks. So that actually is fine. Anyway, messed up font of rule renewal. This one I messed up quite a bit. It doesn't go through obstructing terrain or off-board. It actually specifically says in the rules that obstructing terrain does not count as spaces. So, and font of renewal specifically says it goes by number of spaces. Now, this does mean you can go around it if you have enough spaces to go around it. So if you just weave around it or go around the corner, that does work. Not too big of a deal. I've actually been doing playthroughs without font of renewal. despite people saying it's overpowered for some reason. I messed up Halo removing armor. This was only significant because we fought against Merchounds, and Merchounds specifically target things with with armor or highest armor, and Halo removing the armor actually messes with the AI targeting. I did have some math errors here and there, especially towards the end where I got pretty lazy with it. Forgetting to trigger totems, there's some situations where I just failed to trigger a totem. Usually, if I ran into something like this, I would just cut the video and just restart and just retry it to try to be more legit. Forgetting about low ceiling. Again, when I ran into this issue in Chapter 3, I retconned the entire encounter and just started from scratch. Not fully understanding pushing and pulling, and I kind of wish they had better examples of it in the book. I think I have a okay understanding for it. At least pushing I kind of fully understand now, but pulling sometimes I don't really know the order of the steps or how they're supposed to be sometimes. Not fully understanding technical tokens. I just did not. Those do go around terrain, so they don't just. So they will just drag you around corners and stuff to get you closer to the corpse collector. Forgetting to read Wilt. This is actually a big one. So Wilt. My cat is trying to bite me. There it is, Wilt. So Wilt does 2 additional irreducible damage, but it also ignores resistances. That includes resistances gained from things like burrowing. So against Cassithus and Alana, I didn't really need to worry about switching arrows. I could have just stayed with the barbed arrows and did max damage because I had Wilt on them. So yeah, that was actually a mistake that hurt me a lot and made my boss fight several hours long. Let's see, and then failing to read in general. There was obviously some story triggers that I just failed to read somehow. Also, there's just parts in the rulebooks that I've read through the rulebook, but there's a lot of little small details that are just kind of hard to keep track of and hard to remember, which is just some feedback I also have about the rulebook in general. Sorry, I'm being distracted by a cat right now. So with that's all the rules mistakes. Again, I apologize for all the rules mistakes. I actually feel less bad about it now that I've watched some other people's playthroughs of Middara on YouTube and so forth. I don't think I've seen a playthrough that has done all the rules correctly, including my own. In fact, I've been trying to do recordings of crawl mode recently, or a few weeks ago, and I ended up scrapping them because I kept making mistakes. And I wanted to do a playthrough where I made I didn't make any rules mistakes. When you play with other people, it's a lot less troublesome. Usually, they'll be willing to catch me on making reading mistakes and things like that. But yeah, it's a very dense game. There's a lot to it. Let's talk about, as you can see, I have notes here. Let's talk about Act 1. So overall, Act 1 is I definitely liked it. I liked the story. I like the recordings of it and stuff like that. When I play with other people in actual groups, I usually do spark notes. But even then, I do also usually try to include any additional information I felt was kind of important for the lore. But playing on my own and kind of just going through the story and stuff, I think I definitely have no complaints about the story. I think it's pretty decent. There's a few parts where it kind of felt a little strange. Like certain characters would act a way that didn't entirely make sense. For example, the one where you had to help the Patel family try to get their kid back by going to get the Lotus Blossom. And Remy in that particular side quest was very, very hostile. And I believe the idea is, of course, that she just recently learned about how her dad's, essentially a Sith Lord or whatever, a Shadow Broker type character, and was kind of trying to, deal with that. The thing is there's only really, as far as the encounter at the end, the story at the end of Chapter 2, where all that gets resolved, Remy, for the most part, leaves her father in reasonably okay or good terms in most cases. There's only one outcome where she's actually very, very angry at him, and that was an option that was available to us, but we didn't take it. And that situation, I would understand her being just really hostile, being like, yeah, screw meeting your actual family, they kind of suck. But all the other outcomes, her and her dad are okay. In fact, her dad kind of saves her friends and all that. So it was kind of weird that her personality kind of changes. Now, granted, they did try to make an effort to try to take that into account in some of the encounters or some of the story flags, where it just gives you additional information or gives you more clarified information that fits the setting. But in the case of that particular encounter, there was no story flags that would change it, and so it was just kind of weird that suddenly Remy was very hostile and very negative overall. And then there's a couple of other situations. I've done both versions of the coffin encounter where I chose to help it instead of fight it, and the responses are kind of different as well. In fact, some of the responses are different in how which character gets gobbled up by the coffin actually changes how Zeke responds, which is really weird. Like, he'll be like, I kind of regret we killed the thing, and then I do the same encounter, but a different character gets gobbled up, which leads to a different story event, and Zeke will be like, oh man, you guys were right. I was like, it's just kind of weird. Like, some of those story bits are a little off. Speaking of the story bits, there are a lot of story flags. There are technically 43, because these two are actually one. It's just they ran out of space. There are 43 flags. Out of the 43 flags, I kind of did a loose count in my head about what I've gone through. I would say 15 to 18 were referenced. Some of them, I'd say 15 to 8. I give a range because depending on what choices and what sort of outcomes you have, that can influence what some of these flags could actually matter for. But some of them are literally kind of one and done, like bounce or bounce. You get it, and then soon after it checks it, and after that I don't expect to ever be asked about bounce or bounced in chapters 2 and 3, or acts 2 and 3. And then I would say maybe 4 to 7 of these flags are out of the 15 to 18 that are referenced. 4 to 7 are, I would say, significant, as in they change something in the story or gameplay in a very massive fashion. An example of this would be something like Experience Guide. Experience Guide is if you pick up Patrick early, which you can do, he influences quite a bit. He's referenced this particular story flag is referenced all the way to chapter 5. All the way to chapter 5, only then will it stop referencing it. And this is major. It gives you an extra encounter. It gives you an extra character. It's a major change. Obviously, the other major ones are ones that involve characters dying. For example, there are situations where Zephyr can die. Obviously, there was the choice we can sacrifice Rook, which definitely has a major change. And you may think, well, 4 to 7 doesn't seem like a lot, but that's just for Act 1. Some of these changes are going to have to carry over into Act 2 and 3. Like, I can't imagine playing out both Acts 2 and 3 with characters missing. Like, Rook could be gone. Like, the character that you played from the very beginning of the Mast all the way to the very end could be gone. And, yeah, there's probably going to be a lot of story flags for those. Now, I did mention there are 43 story flags, and there's probably about 25 of them that never get referenced. A good chunk of them. So that means they carry over. It's possible they carry over into Act 2 and 3. I don't expect them to just forget a flag and never trigger it. And so a lot of the comparisons I could try to draw from is like, the Bioware games, the Mass Effects, the Dragon Ages, where they, any choices you made in the previous game will carry over to the next. I guess as a consumer, it could be kind of annoying that, you bought this base game and there's so much stuff that's just left hanging. But at the same time, a lot of people were big fans of the trilogies, and definitely look forward to seeing how their choices mattered. That being said, I know from my experiences of playing Mass Effect 2 and playing most of Dragon Age 2 that a lot of the decisions in the previous games were mostly just fluff. But most of it was fluff. Though I guess in Mass Effect 3, it probably had some major ones because obviously certain characters could be dead, which could definitely influence certain interactions. But I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to hopefully be able to pull this through with the story stuff. I definitely look forward to seeing what happens in the future acts, because the future acts, like, it's already implied that the party is splitting. If we were to talk about the splitting, the party's splitting. Zeke, Patrick, and Shayla are going to be going to Arcala to try to get a new stone, essentially a new seal made. And then you got Remy, Nightingale, Justice, Damocles, and if he's alive, Rook, and if he's alive and not in prison, Zephyr. So there's the split's interesting because my primary supports and essentially my ace is going to be in one group, and then everyone else is going to be yanked in the other for the most part. So I definitely kind of look forward to seeing how that plays out. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with it. Speaking about Act 1 in general, hardest fight, Aisling, hands down. Even the nerf version, she's still the hardest. It's not her stats per se. It's the fact that you lose a party member that gets turned against you and can potentially punish you for certain builds. Like if you made Nightingale into a caster, you'll be taking even more damage per turn. And you may have a character that can not really do anything, depending on what their build is. If they happen to be an archer, they could be in a lot of trouble if they never got to the item to get a bow back. And since you don't know what's happening ahead of time, you usually are not going to do anything cheeky like unequip the character and carry their gear over to the encounter. So essentially you're going down to like 2.5 party members, and then you have Patrick as a command character, which command characters are not very good. There's only 2 command characters. Well, there's a couple of command characters that are okay, and some that are actually good. But overall, my assumption for command characters is they're usually really bad compared to an adventurer. And that makes the fight hard. That being said, I did find ways to cheese it. It does require a certain unique item to do it. And it's even though I say it's a cheese, you're going to be terrified the entire time because there's multiple points of failure to make the cheese work. But essentially it involves breaking the bridge and making it so she can't jump across. Anyway, as for other difficult battles, Blighted Hendrix, if done correctly, is probably one of the most difficult fights as well, just simply because he's just pure chaos. He runs through everything, he just does lots of damage, does a lot of status effects. He can be cheesed if you have a certain item, but beyond that, he's a DPS race. Fonta Renewal is probably a must. If you can't DPS race, you pretty much have to have Fonta Renewal to endure him. The coffin can be very difficult because obviously you can lose a party member. In my case, I lost my ace, which made the fight a lot harder. He also has a lot of instant death effects and a lot of high spell effects, which spells are very dangerous for characters because low conviction in general. And then Lana and Cassis, on paper, they should be a lot more difficult than they are. But I would say the big difficulty is just the endurance. Like it's just you're pumping through 1,200 damage. Obviously, you could try to just focus on Alana, but that's actually really, really dangerous. And also, you'll be giving up an achievement that's really good to have. I think that achievement is the one that gets you Homemade Brooch, I think, but I don't remember. It was either I think it gave you Homemade Brooch, but I don't remember. But yeah, definitely some hard fights. Obviously, I play this game in a certain way where I'm very methodical and I'm very cautious. Once I kind of understood how the totem mechanics work, I played it in a way that made sure I capitalized as best as possible. I will say there are some parts that are very Dark Souls-y in a bad way, where it's like, hey, surprise, you didn't know this is going to happen, now you're screwed. Like, for example, traps on traps, where the description didn't mention that there's holes in the wall, but it doesn't say which walls, so you don't know which you really should be able to see, because it mentions that you can see them. but those totems will trigger traps that you can't avoid if you don't know about them, and they don't involve any skill checks. Any events that involve applying effects or instant death without a check is very, very bad, in my opinion. And as for, I know some people have complained. I think some commenters have mentioned like, "Hey, I don't like how the totems will just randomly spawn shit in certain locations," and you're like, "Hey, surprise, you're gonna get killed." I would say compared to most games, first of all, you might. I would say in general, like look back at all the games you do enjoy playing, like various RPGs and stuff, and you may be surprised about how many surprises they tend to throw at you. Like Final Fantasy VI, if you go up the Magus Tower and you fight the boss there, you'll be like, "Oh wow, this is a normal fight," until the very end when he casts Ultima and completely wipes your party because you didn't know it was coming. Yeah, even the most popular games have these surprise things. I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm just saying it's often something they do. In this game, there's enough mechanics for you to usually deal with them. The only ones I would probably call foul on were a lot of them that were in the bounty, like the ones where you had to go through the underwater passages and then surprise there's 6 cave sickles and they go right after you, or the one after it where it's like, "Hey, you're in water that will immediately throw you off a cliff if you don't move, and here's some frag ores for good measure." There's definitely a lot of issues on some of those encounters. I definitely did not like, and in some cases they even said it was on purpose. Like in the case of the bounties, they specifically made them so hard that they wanted players to lose the bounty and then take that knowledge to try again. Same thing for the actual story mode. Like if you redo the story, they expect you to use prior knowledge, just like if you were to replay a video game. That being said, I still don't like anything. I don't like mechanics that are designed around that, or levels that are designed around that, because it's kind of like do it again stupid gameplay. But that is something to note. Like I would say overall, as far as do it again stupid type gameplay, this game doesn't have too much of it. There's like I said, with proper planning and just caution, you can usually react well enough against most of the events that occur in this game. Besides that, I guess one thing to note, even though I kind of showed off the ace build in Chapter 5, I went through the majority of the game without the ace build. Obviously, I did make tons of rules mistakes, but overall, I was able to kind of go through the game. Now, I did have one character that did have Quick Blow, even before that, and that was Nightingale. But even without the top DPS build that can do, 300 damage or whatever, you can get through majority of the game without pure meta builds. And even the case of meta builds, there's enough flexibility with the meta that you can kind of make things your own in a lot of ways. I'm playing in a group where one person didn't really know what to go build wise, and so I offered her, "Hey, here's a build that lets you do a bunch of damage, a bunch of attacks, a bunch of damage. You can put it on Remy, fly around, murder stuff." And she was like, "Done." But she chose different relics and accessories for me. Like for example, if I were to start an ace build from scratch, I would usually probably take something like Ethereum Kotor, so I can have an extra reroll and extra health. But she ended up taking something like weapon straps, which obviously does not give you extra health or rerolls, but it gave her a extra dodge and made it so she can re-equip for free. Or first re-equip will be free. And so she would be able to do this, and essentially she would carry a bunch of extra relics, like extra fight drives, and she would just swap items really quick during a counter. So if she ever needed to do a lot of attacks to murder something, she'll do all of her standard attacks with, the standard setup, false idol, blade works, quick blow. And then afterwards she'll be like, "All right, well, still alive? All right, great. I'm going to do fight drive, and then I'm going to free re-equip another fight drive in, and then free swap in some additional re-rolls with earrings." And it definitely made things very different. One thing that on the Discord that people talked, that I had one discussion about, was I took Morbid Leather, where if you roll high enough, you do extra damage. But some people actually take a different build where they take Marbish Threads. And Marbish Threads is, if you're flanking, you just do an extra 2 damage. So as long as you're flanking, you just get the extra 2 damage anyway, which is kind of neat. So you don't actually have to go morbid leather with this sort of build. You could go with, if you have Jack of all blades, which gives you flanking off of edges and obstructing terrain, Marvelous Res is an option. And in all my playthroughs, I've kind of been tweaking these builds more and more. Like as you see for Nightingale here, I have a build where I'm still doing most of the usual stuff, but I ended up dropping Brutal Slaughter and Murder Circus, and I ended up dipping into Sanctus, and I ended up going for things like there's an ability that lets you get buffs whenever you hit Paradigm Assault, and so this allowed me to make it so my Nightingale would actually be able to self-buff herself with Courage whenever she hits. And it says when you hit, so you can do it before damage calculation. So you can hit, immediately get Courage, and then get a bunch of extra damage. So definitely another way to kind of play it. And also gets you a little bit into Sanctus, which gives you access to things like, regeneration, the heal over time ability stuff that kind of help mitigate the infection, and so forth. Overall, all the characters are very interesting. I would say ability-wise, a lot of them range from meh to very, very good. But for the most part, the thing that kind of decides your characters is usually the actual equipment and disciplines you take, which is always good. I would say balance-wise, I think the game is... How do I say it? Obviously, there are builds that are a bit stronger than others. Like, Shayla's, this Ace build, dual weapon, multi-attack, Courage build, does more damage than any other build in the game. That being said, her being that high damage does not make the other characters useless. She would not be able to solo the Dark Lord by herself. Or is it Dark Lord, Shadow Lord herself? She would need help from other characters, and with that, and in a lot of cases, when you're fighting mobs, just regular units, you don't need 300 damage. In a lot of cases, you'll kill within the first couple of strikes, and then you will be stuck in place with maybe some additional mobility from something like the Shadows. In which case, you'll need the other characters to back you up. The only builds I would say are quote unquote not useful in this game is anything that revolves around soaking hits on purpose. So counter builds, quote unquote tank builds, where your purpose is just to take hits for everybody else. Those are not very useful in this game. This game expects you to do high amounts of DPS. Back in the earlier videos, I obviously voiced concern about the game basing its HP off of something like summoning builds. As you can probably tell from the end of this series, summoning is okay at best. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to have a bunch of neat little character espers that can kind of help you out. But as a build, they tend to not do very well because it's the same issue. Espers are neat, but they're still command cards, and command cards are worse than adventurers. And to have those command cards, you're usually giving up stuff on your adventurer yourself. Some people try to argue that summoning is very strong in the early game, but in my experiences in playing this game multiple times and making various starter builds, if summoning is out DPSing you, it's probably because your build is not strong enough. That's just the general. Even if you don't go full meta, you should be able to keep up with a summoner. Obviously, the main draw for summoner is you can get another character with a bunch of HP, but again, that's tanking, and you don't. In this game, it's all about DPS and killing things before it kills you. So generally, it's not the best. There is the Valentine's bundle, which adds more espers. Unfortunately, they all are not very good. In the end, if you want the best DPS, it's Femke and DM. Everything beyond Femke and DM is mostly the things that usually stand out as their utility. So for Agaris has pushes and pulls, and then the various Valentine bundles have a lot of unique effects as well, where they can terrain manipulate or do some other weird stuff. And I would say the other character I would use that possibly for DPS is actually Elifie. Elifie is actually really good if you can get her some good attack rolls, combat dice, and things like that. The biggest issue about the espers in general is they usually don't have very many means. They don't really have any ways of rerolling. Femke and DM are the only ones that have a built-in reroll. And once you miss an attack in this game, you lose courage. And the end game is pretty much get courage and have courage. Never lose courage. If you lose courage, your DPS just drops like a rock. But that being said, all the builds I would say are pretty useful. Some of them are kind of hard to use. I would say if there's any builds, like I said, tanking, generally not very good. Conduit, not very good. Unfortunately, it's oddly enough too expensive to actually make use of. It also expects you to take it early. In most cases, I've done a run where I took Conduit, and in most cases, all I used it for was for some healing and possible cleansing. It kind of gives you a nice utility belt, but that's about it. And in my opinion, you're probably better off just making a standard support build at that point. And again, Conduit's good for tanking, but again, tanking is the least useful role in this game. So yeah, now, like I mentioned before, they definitely did not base the HPs of the bosses off of summoning. They have admitted to it being based off quick blow, which obviously is the top DPS spec is anything that uses quick blow. And some people have been trying to suggest nerfs to quick blow, but I literally tell them in Discord every time it's brought up that, hey, if you nerf quick blow, boss fights are going to take forever. And the devs even agree. They're like, yeah, we would have to rebalance all the HP if we nerf quick blow right now. And I'm not bothered by that. Like, quick blow being really strong, or at least a very strong damage multiplier, it's not an issue for me. I have a lot of fun with quick blow. Like, it's like, even though it's very straightforward, it's like, hey, you can get a free follow-up attack, or you get a follow-up attack for 1 stamina. The fact that you can quick blow off of anything but a quick blow makes it really, really fun. While melee does the most damage, I have the most fun with a ranged quick blow build, because you can quick blow off of things like Overwatch or the subjugator effects, and just there's so many things you can kind of just bounce attacks off of. It's just a lot of fun. So I definitely don't mind it. Like, that's really the key thing. You want your build to be effective enough. Doesn't have to be the top DPS. It just needs to be effective enough to progress, and the build should be fun to play. That's really all that matters. And overall, I would say there are tons of builds in this game that are just fun to play. Like, I like the idea of being a Vow distributor type character like Damocles. I like. I love the one-shot builds where you sacrifice a bunch of your HP for a ton of damage, and then you attack from very, very far away with Sinful Privilege. There's a lot of cool things you can do with this. And there's effects I haven't messed with yet. A friend in one of my groups kind of showed off Zealous Reprisal. I've never used it, but I've seen it in play now, and it's really, really cool. They took my Justice build, and instead of going all core, they went down Sanctus, and so they'll do something like Bring the Shadows plus Zealous Reprisal. So hits everybody for some damage, puts darkness on them, and then pushes one of them off a cliff. So a lot of cool stuff. Speaking of, I think the most fun build is actually Justice, even though her DPS is much lower. I like the idea of having really, really high movement and just being Shadow the Hedgehog and just running through a bunch of enemies. It's actually surprisingly fun, and it's actually surprisingly effective, even though the single target DPS is much, much lower. As you can probably tell from me just talking about builds, that's kind of the main fun about this game. Like, I like the story and all that, but even if the story shits itself in Acts 2 and 3, being able to kind of just see these builds evolve and, from start to finish is a lot of fun. I always have a lot of fun seeing what other people build, for better or for worse. Definitely some good stuff there. As for other things I guess I could talk about, I guess since we're talking about builds and balance, the devs, I'm a little concerned about some of the things the devs are doing. Honestly, first of all, the devs putting this on Tabletop Simulator, like, huge kudos. Really, really good. That was a really good thing they did. A lot of Kickstarters seem to be doing that more often now, where they'll actually include a TTS module to try out the game. And honestly, that's like people taking advantage of technology to make board games better is great. It also adds a lot of flexibility as far as like you don't have to worry about card limitations and things like that in Tabletop Simulator. Allows a lot of good stuff here. I hope they eventually include Acts 2 and 3. Otherwise, I'll have to do it myself for personal use. But yeah, like huge kudos for this company for doing that, and they've been really open. The Discord, they've been talking a lot. It's been really good. My only concerns are one thing is they've been trying to rebalance things. Like the Kickstarter they did was the idea was to reprint some stuff, get some updated rules and all that stuff. But it seems like they're still trying to update rules. Like with the errata, they're trying to change. What do you call it? They're trying to change utility cores again. Trying to nerf them. They're trying to nerf font of renewal for some reason because they apparently think it needs to be nerfed. For some reason, they think summoning is strong or the single strongest card, even though it's not. Even in a vacuum, it's not the strongest. If you would say a card by itself be the strongest, I would say Proof of Divinity because it provides courage, and courage is by far broken in this game. But it feels like there was a Red Letter Media that kind of talked about some of. They've done a bunch of videos on Star Wars and George Lucas, but there was one, and they were kind of talking about how George Lucas keeps coming out with more and more special editions of of A New Hope, where he keeps changing things, like changing it so Han doesn't shoot first, and then making it so there's a part where R2-D2 is supposed to be hiding, and so they added more rocks for some reason. It was like constantly going back to it to constantly try to fix things and try to perfect it in some sort of vision. And that's kind of what it kind of feels like on some of this. Like they keep going back to things. Like at this point, they're on 1.1, 1.2 of this version of the game. They should be looking forward more than they should be looking back. One of the things I know one of the developers is specifically trying to focus on is try to fix the gold economy. And that's part of the reason why they keep trying to nerf things like font of renewal and utility cores. But in a lot of cases, I honestly think that's just going to hurt new players, because new players obviously are not going to know the meta and not know all the fancy builds and tricks. And honestly, healing is usually there to kind of help mitigate mistakes and bad luck. And I don't fully agree with all of the changes they've been trying to make. Like their supposed goal is they're trying to make players actually spend money on consumables. And me and a number of other players on the Discord are literally telling them we're RPG players. We're not going to buy consumables if we don't have to. I think in this playthrough I bought one consumable, and that was because I needed a pager. Because you don't get a pager until after an encounter and with the utility cores. So I'm a bit concerned that they're going to try to drag things down in that direction. That being said, it's the errata, and unless they actually send me new cards, like Kingdom Death Monster just sent me new cards, I'm not going to worry about it, unless, of course, it gets updated in the TTS, in which case I'll just endure it. Like, them nerfing font doesn't affect me anymore. I don't rely on it. I've done a playthrough where I literally took it as my last ability before the Shadow Lord, just because I had this experience to spend. So I'm not concerned about it, because it is what it is. I know some of the changes they are planning for utility core makes them useless, in which case, if they make them useless, I'll take deflection cores. And then I literally told him, I was like, if you nerf utility cores, I'll just stop taking utility cores, and I'll just take, deflection cores. In which case, deflection cores makes it easier for me to resist effects, so I don't actually need to buy items then. But, I don't know. It's kind of a mess in that aspect. That being said, I know that's just kind of a focus of some of the devs. The rest of them are, of course, all focused on the new bounties, the new acts, and like I said, overall the game's really, really good. Abraxas I've complained about. Obviously, I think it's horrible. It's not a very good game. They either need to make it better, or they need to make an option that's a quick play type thing. Also, on the topic about gold and the economy in this game, the gold range, the gold variable, I guess, how much the gold can be different for playthrough to playthrough is insane. I don't see how they can actually possibly balance it. Obviously, there are different gold amounts from drops. That's a variant. There are item drops, which can save you a lot of money depending on if and when you get it. That could save you a lot of gold. Certain choices can get you a bunch of gold. Certain skill checks can get you a bunch of gold and or items. For example, there was the group presence check, which we failed in this playthrough. If you pass that check, you get far... I'm trying not to spoil here, but you get far less. Far less. I think when we did those encounters that led us to fighting Damocles, we made like easily over 300 gold worth of gold and items. You would get far less than that if you pass the check. In fact, there's a number of players that literally tell the devs, "Hey, we passed this check and we just went back and said we failed it because it's such a horrible reward when you pass it." And then I think one thing they didn't really take into account towards the end, like obviously the battles get bigger, which means you fight more monsters, and then those monsters, of course, drop loot. And since we fight so many monsters, we eventually just start clearing out the deck consistently. We start doing that in uncommon tier, and we definitely did it multiple times in rare tier. And that means you're guaranteed that you're going to get a monster loot, which can get you anywhere from 50 to 75 gold, depending on what tier you're in. If you traded it in for an upgrade, that is. You'll get a unique, assuming there's one in the deck, which can save you a ton of money. Soul Piercer saved. If you got a Soul Piercer as a drop, you just saved yourself 205 gold. And then there's the actual item cards, which can get you either an accessory or a bunch of other items. Speaking of, they're trying to nerf accessories apparently too. One of the things I did complain about is this whole thing about the cost of accessories going up as you go up loot levels. And I was just like, well, I just buy them real early. And the devs were like, well, we'll just do a fixed cost that's a lot more expensive, like 90 gold. And I was like, these accessories are not worth 90 gold. Like I said, they're trying so hard to trying to make us spend gold. That being said, in the early game, I was starving for gold. Like I didn't have a quote unquote enough gold until about chapter 4. And once you hit chapter 4, there's not as many opportunities to actually spend your gold because you're not in cities anymore. And so you just end up hoarding a bunch of gold, and then by the time you get to an actual point to shop, you've also gotten a bunch of drops, meaning you need even less gold to actually gear up your characters. Also, number of people might not actually gear up their off characters. They might just focus entirely on their, the primary 4 characters, and then let the others just get hand-me-downs, which is definitely something I've seen in playthroughs. They don't have any control over that, and so, like I said, I don't fault the dev who is working on it. I believe that was actually what they were hired to do. But I feel like they're trying to make a problem that doesn't really exist. Especially in this game, it's just okay. You're gonna have a bunch of gold going into Act 6 or Act 2 or whatever. But since there's more likely going to be another tier of gear, the difference in cost here between an uncommon and a rare, this is twice as much. If it doubles again, with all the gold I have to spare, I only have 400 gold going into this. I've definitely done playthroughs where I had 1,000 gold, but even then, that would only get me a couple items if it was a higher tier. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm probably rambling a bit here. Also, while I'm talking here, I did remember another rule I made a mistake on. Anything that's summoned doesn't drop loot. And there were some situations where I thought something was not considered summoned. And apparently those were not supposed to drop loot. Like, for example, Melody's Espers, even though they're summoned through an event rather than the actual summon ability, those are counted as summons, so they shouldn't have dropped a loot card. Anyway, I think my overall only other complaint is like how the rules. It's very easy to learn the gameplay loop, but there are a lot of specifics in this game that are unclear, or literally the rulebook doesn't tell you anything about. Like, for example, if you provoke a break attack when you're moving through an occupied tile, like an allied occupied tile, and you decide to counter, you don't know what to do there. Now, the devs have already said in Discord that what you're supposed to do is you place your character anywhere adjacent to that tile. But the rulebook doesn't tell you that, and there's no examples that tell you that. The game definitely needed a lot more specific examples about certain edge cases in this game, because there's a lot of them. Better examples of pushing and pulling, better examples of how to handle break attacks and counters, moving through opponents, how actions, how you can't start another action without ending your current action. Those things, I think, could have used some better examples. Also, the rulebook in general, while there's sections that are very easy to find and keep track of, some are literally in little important boxes that, even though it's labeled important, you still have to find what page it's on, and usually you don't know what section that would be in when looking up. Like, for example, the stuff about spawning and about the espers not dropping things if they're summoned. I don't know. I usually don't know where to find that important note. I know it's there in the book, but if I were to think, try to think, oh, is there any rules specific about these? I wouldn't know. Flipping through the book real quick, I probably wouldn't be able to find it. And some of these could be fixed a lot easier by just taking advantage of certain keywords they already have in the game. Like, for example, for things that don't drop loot, you label it trivial. You could very easily make it so something like, to use an example, something like our living antediluvian here. She does a summon. You can look down there, summon a listed counter esper as an opposing esper and place it with an SOI as close to an opponent as possible. Now, obviously, this thing is pretty dense with text, but you could very easily put I still say you could pretty easily put something like this figure has trivial. Same thing for events. So you could be like, okay, summon the listed encounter esper as an opposing esper, and as close to the opponent as possible. This figure has trivial. At which point you're like, okay, I know what trivial is. It doesn't drop loot. So I think that was one thing they should have taken more advantage of, is their keywords. It definitely would make things a lot easier to understand. And honestly, it makes it so they don't have to devote so much text towards rules that people are going to easily misread or forget about. Speaking of spawning, I did have questions about spawning in this game, because obviously there are situations like maybe there's a diagram that you have to pull up, and that diagram spawns a living oblation and Fimke and DM. You see that on there on the diagram. Are Fimke and DM spawned, or are they summoned? I don't know. In some cases, when I asked certain questions about things, like for example with Melody, the devs were like, "Oh, it's obvious. You're supposed to say it's summoned." I don't know that. And there are multiple situations and multiple players that have said, "Hey, this is unclear," and the devs have responded, "No, it's clear." But in gameplay or game design, perception is reality, which means if the players don't think it's clear, it's not clear, unfortunately. Doesn't matter how good your code is or how good your design is. If they think it's not great, it's not great. Like I said, there's a lot of little things. Like the overall gameplay loop is very easy to teach and learn, but there's a lot of little things that are just, I don't know the answers to. And I can ask them, but having to constantly ask on Discord, hey, how to do this, how to do that, or constantly look up errata, is not something I generally want to do in a board game. Of course, they've also said things along the lines of, hey, you can just do whatever house rules you want, which I do house rules for things like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder and those types of games. But for a board game, like an actual board game, one of the draws I have towards these games is the fact they have more solid rules that everyone's on the same page. So being told, hey, just make it up, I'm actually not very comfortable doing in this type of game, because I want it to be clear. I don't want someone to be a referee / DM for a game like this. Anyway, so I think I've been rambling for over an hour now. So, like I said, overall, I love this game. through this playthrough, I did a bunch of my own playthroughs. I did like 4, 5, 6 of my own playthroughs of this. I'm in 2 different groups that I'm trying to schedule with and constantly get through. Both of them are in chapter 4 right now. I'm definitely enjoying seeing how they play the games and so forth. But yeah, it's like I said, the only issues I have with it is some of the rules are very unclear. There are a lot of edge cases, but even with that in mind, like as the devs have said, you can at least push through it by like, okay, we'll just make this call for this and keep consistent, and you'll be able to play through it. I look forward to Acts 2 and 3. They did come out with the new bounty, the K-Sickle Queen, which does a bunch of weird things apparently. It's supposedly in playtesting though, so I haven't actually bothered with it yet. I do plan on doing crawl mode once I have time and once I can do better rules or be better familiar with the rules. I do plan on using a bunch of the promo characters as well as characters that are crawl mode only to show them off. I did scan in all the promo cards I had for my personal use, so hopefully you guys will get some fun in seeing that. I'm not sure when that's going to come out though, but I will hopefully have that out soon. And like I said, I'm planning on doing crawl mode, but and it's definitely very different from story mode, like how kind of the gameplay flow is a little bit. So hopefully you'll get something out of it. But until then, I apologize for all the rambling. I apologize for all the rules mistakes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the game, and definitely try it out on Tabletop Simulator if you're curious about the game. And also if you're if you end up enjoying it, think about buying the physical copy and supporting the devs. Until then, I am The Depressed Hero. This was Middara on Tabletop Simulator. I'll see you guys next time.